On October 28th of this year, hockey player Adam Johnson suffered a life-ending injury that some believe was not an accident, and others believe that it could have been an accident. Now, the person that caused the death of Adam Johnson is Matt Petgrave, and you will see in this clip where Matt Petgrave lifts his leg and ends up slicing the neck of Adam Johnson with the bottom of his skate. So let's watch that clip here.
That we announced that Nottingham Panthers forward Adam Johnson has died after suffering a serious cut to his neck from...
Now the question has become, was this intentional? Did Matt Petgrave wake up that morning and say, hey, I'm going to hurt somebody, or even worse, I'm going to injure him to the point of death? Or was this a tragic accident because maybe Matt had bumped into a different defender? He didn't quite know what he was doing. And I think we all agree, based off of everything I'm seeing on the internet, there's a small percentage that think that Matt Petgrave had intent when he was making this play to end Adam Johnson's life. I would say a larger percentage, probably 90% of the people that I've seen out on forums and even my previous video, think that there wasn't an intent to kill, but there was an intent to injure Adam Johnson, and there definitely was intent to make contact. Now, with that, when you make the intent to make contact, even though it ended up in death, and maybe you didn't intend to create that death, you are still liable for that negligence, okay? And this is basically what we're seeing today. The news article that came out today states man was picked up on suspicion of manslaughter. So what does that mean? Well, first, nobody's been charged with manslaughter yet, just been picked up on suspicion, and that could lead to manslaughter charges or other charges based off of what the findings are of the detectives. And Matt Petgraves hasn't been named as that person or that suspect. Now, let's all agree, we know it's Matt Petgraves. You saw it in my clip, you know who it is. My question in the very first video might not have been clear, is how do we hold them accountable, and was it a freak accident? The consensus says no, it wasn't a freak accident because there was intent to make that contact with Adam Johnson, and I agree with that. Now, I think obviously the accident is nobody was wishing to intend death on another hockey player, especially a true hockey player. Now, I do think that if the police do charge Matt Petgraves, the prosecution is going to have to get to work very quickly to make sure that the charges stick. Okay, so hear me out on this one. A lot of people say that Matt Petgrave was a dirty player, right? There's some stats out there that says, hey, he had the most penalty minutes, this, that, and everything else. Okay, let's all agree, maybe he was a dirty player, maybe he was very much like Sean Avery, whatever the case might be, but here's what the prosecution is going to have to prove. All of that stuff is going to be news articles. Yes, you could bring in some of the analytics that shows how many penalty minutes that Matt Petgraves has in the league, but is that really going to end up with some sort of conviction? Now, what I think the prosecution is going to have to do here, and what the defense is going to have to defend against, is they're going to have to look at the entire history of Matt Petgraves. They're going to have to look at how many hits he's delivered, how many times has he injured another player, and what were those injuries. Also, we've heard, if you look on Reddit, there was other clips of Matt Petgraves 13 years ago doing a very similar move to another hockey player. And that would tell me like, hey, that's when he was young, somebody didn't correct it, but I did not find that video, so I could not share it here. So as it stands, as I would say, that's hearsay. If one of you folks can find that video, definitely put the link down in the comments, or send me the link and I'll put the links down in the comments, because that could definitely show a pattern of intent somewhere, okay? So moving forward with the analytics, basically what the prosecution is going to need to do is put into numbers for the jury to see this is how often Matt Petgraves hurt somebody. This was his intent. He's done this before, quote unquote dirty player, right? He went out of the norm or out of the parameters of what hockey is and wanted to hurt the player on the other side. They would also show a pattern. How often does Matt Petgraves get outplayed when taking the blue line? And if he has been outplayed, does he do things like slashing, cross checks, or even hit people from behind? And how often has that led to injuries? I think these are all important topics that are going to play a factor into this case. But That's all technical stuff for right now. Let's just talk about what happened today. Number one, I think you're going to see Adam Johnson's family. They're not going to be happy by any means, right? They lost their child. They lost their brother. They lost their spouse, right? You could never come back from that, especially in such a short time period. But knowing that the authorities are doing the proper investigation, and they are doing an investigation in uncharted waters, because to my knowledge, the only time I've ever seen charges laid was the Marty McSorley case when he hit Brashear in the back of his head with the hockey stick. And the British Columbia government of Canada decided to go after Marty McSorley. Now, I remember that because I lived in British Columbia at the time. And I was just a youngster and I was watching that and I was horrified from that. A lot of people in my last video thought I was sticking up for Matt Petgraves. At the end of the day, I'm not sticking up one way or another. I do feel for Adam Johnson, and if I was Adam Johnson playing the game, I would definitely want to see some justice being done, especially if we find out that there was some intent behind it. But I would also like to see something happen to Matt Petgraves based off of the hockey play he made. That wasn't a play that was learned. It was a play that he decided to do on his own. So let me be very specific about that. But I do have another question for you folks right now. Is Matt Petgraves the only person that should be blamed in this scenario? And I had to think long and hard about this. I've watched that clip probably 500 times based off of the comments that I was getting on my previous video, just to rewatch it, listen to what your perspectives were. And some of that kind of changed my mind in what was this guy thinking. At the same time, I do believe that everything happens in a split second. So watching it in slow-mo doesn't really do it justice, but it does show some intent to deliver some sort of hit on Adam Johnson. So who else can we blame on this? Well, let's start with the league. If the league is going to impose that neck guards become mandatory in 2024, was this something that could have been prevented from the league? Now, I'm not saying that the league is liable for what Matt Petgraves did or the decision that he made to go at Adam Johnson the way that he did, but I do think that there's some liability here from the league itself, knowing that there was a piece of equipment that currently exists today that could have prevented this tragedy from happening. Now, in my previous video, I did mention that this doesn't happen often, but we did use some examples where it did happen. And in those examples, it typically showed that they were accidental. Somebody maybe fell to the ground and end up getting a skate to the face or the neck or an arm or whatever the case might be. I also referenced Clint Malarchuk, who was playing for the Sabres back in, I think it was the early 90s. It could have been late 80s. I'm pretty sure it was early 90s, where the first time I had ever seen somebody get sliced across the neck with a hockey skate. These are knives on the bottom of your feet. And I do agree with a lot of the comments on my previous video. You should know that those are weapons. Even if you're not using them as weapons, they are dangerous and they can hurt people, right? So these are all things that we need to consider. So are the leagues responsible for making sure that we're wearing these equipment? Now, the leagues make sure that people wear knee pads, elbow pads, chest protectors, right? Helmets, and all sorts of things in between before somebody can get on the ice. As a matter of fact, you get a penalty if you take your helmet off, right? I've been thrown out of games because my helmet has come off. Not because I was fighting or because there was a hit, but because my helmet was loose, it came off. Keep in mind, I don't play in any pro leagues, but that's an automatic have to leave the ice game misconduct because your helmet wasn't put on correctly. Now we have equipment, a neck guard, that has been around for a long time. Goalies have had neck guards for a long time, and we don't force players to use them. But if we know that there's a piece of equipment that works, is there a piece of liability that the family of Adam Johnson is going to be able to go after? And that's the question I ask you folks, right? And will this help the case for Matt Petgraves and the defense team saying, hey, ultimately it was up to that player, up to that league, and ultimately up to that sport to enact a piece of equipment that would prevent this from happening, because we've seen this happen accidentally before, and we wouldn't be in this case today if Adam Johnson was wearing that neck guard. Now, I don't want to confuse people. I'm not saying Adam Johnson did anything wrong, and I'm not taking anything away from Matt Petgraves. from a perspective that he needs to be held accountable. So I want to be specific on that one because I wasn't specific in my previous video, and a lot of people thought I was sticking up for Matt Petgraves. The question that poses is that the defense is going to use that. Now, can the family of Adam Johnson also use that and say, hey, we deserve some compensation for this because you didn't protect Adam Johnson when he was on the ice, and you ultimately have the responsibility of doing that. You're not responsible for what happened in the sense that Matt Petgrave made those decisions, but you are responsible for everybody that is on that ice on any given night. So I want to hear from you folks. What do you think? I also would love to hear from anybody in the United Kingdom right now that understands the court systems out there. I'm not familiar with them. I'm not an expert. So everything that I reference, especially when we're talking under suspicion of manslaughter, is what I know in the US and in Canada. And that might be different in the UK. So I acknowledge that. I would love to hear from you folks. What does that mean when you're in the UK, when you are under suspicion and you've been brought in and you haven't technically been charged yet? Are you held or can you leave? Are you there against your will? Are you arrested during that period? Would love to hear from anybody that's lived in the United Kingdom or that understands the court systems there to kind of weigh in and help us out with that. On that note, I did try to get this video out as quickly as possible as this happened today. Again, many things may happen from now until you see the video. I've got to edit it, I've got to upload it, and then I got to release it. So there's going to be about 4 hours in between from the time that I recorded this. Matt Petgraves could be charged with manslaughter or a bunch of other things in between. So if that happens, I will try to leave a comment down on this video. As always, if you've been with me this long, I'm your host, Tim Solberg. Leave a like down below. Let's get this video out to as many people. Please leave me a comment too. Love hearing your folks' comment. Love hearing the perspectives as well. And on that note, I hope everybody has a wonderful week. I am bringing you Tiffany Gomez tomorrow and some of her podcast stuff. So that being said, I'll see you all back in a day.